So good evening, everybody. Welcome to the first Talking About Socialism from a Marxist Point of View discussion of 2024. In 2024, we're looking to build on the modest successes we achieved in 2023. Since our first Zoom meeting on 20th of March, we've had about 20 fortnightly discussions, and our existence has now has a modest register among sections of the left. I think it's worth restating the premise of the Talking About Socialism project as expressed in the statement we published towards the end of 2023. We believe the only force capable of resisting war, poverty, and the attacks on democratic rights is the international working class. That's our fundamental belief. The worldwide mass protests against the murderous attacks on Gaza shows that there is resistance, global resistance, and that resistance is possible. The question hanging in the air whenever there are mass movements is how can this be turned into an international movement for fundamental change? How can it add to an international movement for fundamental change to the way that society is organized? To do that effectively and ultimately to destroy capitalism and replace it with a new society based on the common ownership of the world's resources with production planned for need rather than profit, our view is it requires the building of a new massed socialist communist party. And we see the term socialist and communist as interchangeable in our kind of language. Our aim, as set out in the statement, is to urgently build a serious democratic organization for Marxist ideas and activity, with the aim of building support for socialist and communist ideas and for the construction of a mass party based on those ideas. Through discussion and activity, we aim to promote the ideas that we hold, to make them popular within the working class, and to build a group that campaigns to bring into existence the embryo of a new mass party that we so urgently need. And we say in the statement, to this end, we invite all those who share our aims or are interested in finding out more about this to join our discussions. Now, in 2024, we intend to continue with our fortnightly Zoom discussions. We also aim to hold public face-to-face meetings in selected cities and towns around the country, and we want to increase the number and range of articles on our website and look at increasing the recognition of TAS. Now, not to put too fine a point on it, to achieve this and more, we actually need the help of people who have been coming to these meetings. Can you help us organise an in-person meeting in your area? Do you know others who might be interested in joining our discussions? Can you write for our website? Do you have skills that we could use? Would you be interested in helping us promote TAS more generally? And we want to hear your views on how we can improve things that we've been doing. And I'll return to that a bit later. Now, in this context, there are two sorts of issues that face us in 2024 that we might want to spend some time discussing this evening. The first is the political situation that the working class faces. What is the context in which it's operating in, and the context that we're operating in? The second is, what do you, as one of those people and as people who have been accompanying us on this development of TAS in 2023, think we should do to develop TAS as a practical political project? Now, before I discuss these 2 points, I just want to reaffirm the desire that we have for TAS to be an open forum for discussion for socialist and Marxist politics, where we really welcome comradely debate and differences. We want to develop a group that encourages comradely discussion, because we think it's the only way to develop democratic working class politics. We think we achieved this culture in 2023, and we want to build on it in the next 12 months. So, to the first question that I posed, what political situation does the working class face in the period ahead? So I always believe in starting at the level of the totality, at the world level, what's going on in the planet. It's clear that inter-imperialist, and I'm assuming there'll be general agreement on this, but let's debate it out, because there are nuances and different points of view. I'm assuming there is agreement, though, that inter-imperialist conflict is heightening, and that it looks like we're on the road to World War III, unless the international working class can stop it. We can see this, I think, in Ukraine. Mid-2023 offensive by the Ukrainians has failed, and it's highly likely that Ukraine will be forced to negotiate a peace that it doesn't want. I think partly this is due to a miscalculation by NATO, who have found themselves in a much tougher battle in their desire to, I think, basically hegemonize Russia and fight China. It hasn't quite turned out as they expected, and it's become extremely messy. And we might end up with a Korean type situation. We can also see this inter-imperialist conflict over Taiwan and the South China Sea. These are disputes which have been simmering for decades around the Spratly Islands, with Philippines, Vietnam, Taiwan, other countries contesting China's desire, I think, to be hegemonic in that area. And more latterly, we've had what's been happening in the Middle East in Gaza, where in one sense you couldn't make it up, where we have Antony Blinken flying around the Middle East at the moment, pretending, calling for restraint, while the US piles arms into Israel. The Western imperialist powers have warships in the area, and there looks like there's going to be a regional war if things go very badly wrong. In fact, from Israel's killing of one of the leaders of Hezbollah today, that might escalate quite quickly. The key issue, I think, is to stop the march to war. And in trying to do that, to avoid two sorts of what I think are fake anti-imperialism on two fronts. The first is the kind of, there is an element of material truth to this, of multipolar world politics. Now, of course, the US are losing their hegemony as a global power. Other powers are rising. So there is a genuine level of multipolarity emerging, I think. But to think of the BRICS or of China or of Russia as worthy of support against Western imperialist designs, for my view, it's supporting one kind of imperialism against another. Is the kind of multipolar world politics that have been advanced more recently. There's another kind of fake anti-imperialism, which is against Russia itself and against China itself, with a cover of kind of the democratic West against the barbarians at the gate, translated, I think, as the light of the European Union, allied with the United States against Russian imperialism in defense of Ukraine. We need to resist both of those approaches, and we need to stand by an independent working class approach. Now, a bit closer to home, the European Union is going to have a significant set of elections in June 2024. For the last 2 decades, the far right has been building a presence across the continent, latterly exemplified by Kurt Wilders' Islamophobic and authoritarian Freedom Party, becoming the largest party in the Netherlands, something that kind of was slightly inconceivable 40 years ago. Netherlands was the home of liberal, libertarian, kind of cool politics in a way, or cool society. And now we have an Islamophobic party as its largest party. I mean, as I detailed in my introduction on the far right last November, it's not unlikely that in 2024 we'll see the growth of the far right bloc in the European Parliament, and there may be major repercussions coming from that. By contrast, the socialist and communist left in the European Union has weakened. Between 2010 and 2020, the broad left party strategy has comprehensively failed across the continent, particularly in Spain and France and Germany. You can see Chris Strafford's introduction on the broad parties on YouTube, or read his article on the TAS website to get some background on this. But in summary, there's been an almost wholesale failure to build a socialist communist bloc across the continent following the great financial crisis of 2008. And it's been quite a big failure. A bit further afield, there are the elections to be held in the United States. Right now, the Democrats are busy demobilizing any chance of them winning the elections by backing the genocide in Gaza, while there is a mass mobilization against it amongst the most radical and progressive layers. So 12 months from now, the world's going to look very different, or probably will look very different. Now, of course, in Britain, following the Brexit vote, the rise and fall of Corbynism, and the pandemic, we face a general election at the end of the year, which Labour should win. At our final meeting of 2022, Chris Strafford introduced on the attack on democratic rights. I was unable to make. Okay, thank you. I was unable to make that session, but watching it back later, the common sense of the discussion is that Starmerism may make Blair look tame in his attack on the last vestiges of the post-war settlement. In this context, what should socialist communists do? What should they campaign for in 2024? Labour victory? For genuine socialist candidates who are standing? What should we do? For both? It's something that we need to discuss. All of this is set against a backdrop of a growing environmental crisis, the combination of human-made global warming combined with El Nino, heating of the Pacific will create some very hot weather and some very stormy weather. It's not just the heat and stormy weather we have to be worried about. There are, at the same time, multiple environmental crises unfolding. So 2024 is going to be pretty tumultuous in political terms and environmental terms. So very briefly, I'm going to look at the second question that I raised at the start. It's what people here, as people who have been accompanying us on this development of TAS in 2023, think we should do to develop our project as a practical project in 2024. As I said at the start of this introduction, in the next year we intend to continue with our Zoom discussion. We aim to hold public face-to-face meetings in towns and cities where we can do that. We want to increase the number and range of articles on our website and our recognition. Now, we believe there are a large number of socialists and communists who see the need for a mass party of the working class based on socialist and communist politics. Can you help us organise in-person meetings in your area? Do you know others who might be interested in joining our discussions? Or on the other hand, do you think we're mistaken in our belief and should be following a different strategy? If you think that, do tell us. Do put up ideas that we can discuss and debate. Or, and I'll end on this, or did you just think that these events were just a talking shop about socialism, but would like to discuss how we can create a more boots on the ground campaign for the creation of a mass socialist communist party? Thank you.
Thanks very much, Will. That's great. I think Nick might be with us now, but I'm not. Yes. Nick, do you want to come in, or do you want to me to ask for some contributions?
I missed most of Will's contribution, so I'd like to pick up when other people have spoken, if possible.
Okay, that's fine. All right. So, anybody wants to speak, just raise your hand, literally, or using the reactions button. And our usual practice is 3 minutes, so that everybody has the opportunity to speak, and then you can always come back in again. So the first person I can see with their hand raised is Alexander McBurney.
Sandy.
Sandy, oh, of course. Andy, yes, sorry. I'm not well. Sorry, Sandy. And remember to unmute yourself. Can you unmute yourself?
How's that? Can you hear me now?
Brilliant. Yeah, thanks.
Okay. A few points from the introduction where I would have disagreement. I think the first point is I definitely agree with is the danger of World War III, and as American empire declines, the danger that they're trying to offset that decline by very aggressive interventions throughout the world to defeat any of their rivals. I think that's definitely correct, and we can see the situation in Palestine, in Gaza, the horror of it, the how far they're willing to go with genocide, and we can also see the worldwide reaction of working class people and the people of which are often referred to as the South in a solidarity with the Palestinian people. And I think that is a movement that if we're going to build a socialist or communist current, a worldwide current, that is a movement that's very, very important that we have to intervene and fully support. And I think it's important. So that point I totally agree on. The other point, I don't agree that it's an inter-imperialist conflict. I think American imperialism dominates the planet. The dollar dominates. I don't think Russia is an imperialist country. If you do believe that, I would ask you to define when it became an imperialist country. Obviously, it wasn't imperialist when it was the Soviet Union. Was it an imperialist country when it became in the 1990s or the early 2000s when Putin took over? I don't think Russia fulfills that. I think it's quite a defensive regime. It doesn't export capital. It doesn't have investments throughout the world. It doesn't control all the major companies that the USA and the UK does. It's not of that weight. I think it's quite a defensive position. Obviously, Putin's a counter-revolutionary. The Stalinist bureaucracy overthrew the worker state and reintroduced capitalism, but I don't believe it's imperialist. As Trotsky said, if the Stalinist bureaucracy succeeded in overthrowing the worker state and reintroducing capitalism, it would be in the form of a semi-colony, and that's certainly what the USA was aiming for under Yeltsin, but there's been a reaction against that, and so I don't accept that it's imperialist. Certainly Iran's not imperialist. I don't think people would argue that Iran's imperialist. China, there's a debate. I don't think it's an imperialist country. I think because of the American domination of the planet, China is not imperialist. It doesn't mean you support the regime, just it doesn't mean you support Putin, but it does mean that if Russia's attacked and there's an attempt to reintroduce or introduce a semi-colonized status there, or if China's an attack, we should be for the defeat of the US imperialist hegemon. And so I think that's an important, and there's a difference there. There's obviously a difference that we could debate out, but I think it's important. But I do think it's also important that...
Thanks.
Is that my 3 minutes?
It is, I'm afraid.
That was only my first point. That's fine, no problem.
I'm sure there'll be the opportunity to come in again.
Right.
Matthew.
There's a lot to chew on here, as Sandy said. I think that there's a few things in terms. I mean, obviously, the important thing is what's happening in Palestine at the moment and the reaction to that, and the fact that obviously, the imperialist powers of the world are being revealed to the population, not least in their own countries, as a bunch of murderous scumbags. So all the politicians, can now be openly seen as basically dead-eyed murderers. I think that, if you look at what's going on in Europe, actually, what's happening is you talk about socialists and so on. What we're talking about: social democrats, reformists, and former Stalinists. And if you look at it, in terms of the far right, actually, what you're seeing is the more so in Italy, where Meloni, who's comes from a fascist tradition, is prime minister. At the same time, in Sweden, the dominant political forces are Sweden Democrats, again come from a fascist tradition. However, what we are seeing is that fascist tradition is not fully expressed in the fact that both of these forces have removed their street legions, which are vital for the actual, full fascist expression, in order that they can appear as essentially far right bourgeois politicians. Now, obviously, we're all proceeding in that direction towards the far right. In this country too. The Labour Party is a far right organisation. However, what we've also seen, of course, is the political collapse of the Stalinists and the Social Democrats. You can see it in places like Greece, in which Syriza, which generated from the one wing of the Communist Party, comes to power, saying they will resist, the imposition of austerity and poverty, and then, of course, does the opposite. The same in Spain, which you see the forces of the PSOE, the Spanish Socialist Party, allying itself with Podemos, which again comes out of a wing of the Communist Party and is now in alliance through the Sumar and so on and so forth with other elements of the Stalinists, in imposing austerity and poverty on the population. So, why they're surprised that people hate them for this? I can't see it. It's perfectly clear why that should be. That people should hate this people who will send the police, and the army against the working class in their demand just to maintain their own wage levels, can hardly complain when they are hated in return. And so it's a question of, well, okay, how do you move out of those reformist and Stalinist traditions, isn't it? And the question being, I mean, you can see it posed actually very sharply in this country with the whole business of socialist appeal, who seem to think, who seem to think that instituting a larger sect of their own version will somehow solve this problem, which it won't. Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Ed.
Yeah, thanks, Soraya. I wanted to just speak very briefly and look ahead at the general election and what might happen between now and then. I think the socialist left, as very broadly defined to include, the sort of social democratic left that was around the Labour Party, has obviously been through a very significant period of setbacks and destruction of general enthusiasm and activity. But having said that, I think all things can change, and one of the key questions for us as communists is how we relate to and exploit movements in the political situation, which, although will not initially take on a communist character or even necessarily a sort of a very left-wing character, they're very important nonetheless. I think what I have in mind particularly is the opening up of the political situation following the movement of protests against Israel's war on Gaza. Now, I think we all remember very early on in those that the government was mooting a potential ban on displaying the Palestinian flag in certain contexts, or even charging protesters with incitement to disorder, all ironically recycling the language of identity politics, suggesting that certain communities might be made to feel unsafe as a result of peaceful protests. But what we saw following that was the ground actually shifted from under the Tories and from under Keir Starmer. Starmer in particular showed himself to be seriously behind the curve of developing public opinion in relation to a ceasefire, and public opinion, even if it has no particular sympathy for the Palestinians or no particular hostility to Britain's general imperialist aims and defence policy. I think broadly there is a greater number of people now who recognise Israel's gross and cynical overreaction to the attacks of the 7th October for what it is. And I think that's something very significant for us. What does it mean more generally? I think the election is very much Labour's to lose at this point. Polls can obviously move significantly as the election gets closer, even more so once we get into the actual campaign. For us as communists, I think this tells us to assume that we can gain an audience. I think, in my view, there's always a basic obligation on us to present communist politics as a direct and equal alternative to all of the pro-capitalist parties. That should include, I think, standing communist candidates in elections as a matter of course. But more specifically, in this situation that we have right now, we should assume that communist arguments should and can find an argument when put forward in the right way and attractively presented. So I'm going to stop there.
Perfect timing. Thank you. Phil.
Yeah, thanks. This isn't very thought through, so I'll do my best. I mean, people have started on the big stuff, which is totally understandable and, makes sense. And most of it I'd agree with, and a few points I disagree with. But I just wanted to sort of talk about the nuts and bolts of what Will kind of touched on in his lead off about where this organisation goes, because I think people have explained there's a real need for a Marxist organisation. There's a real need for an organisation that's properly democratic and is open. But what I'm struggling with, I suppose, in terms of somebody said, well, what would you like to see out of an organisation over the next year? Is what people like ourselves do that is different to what all the other small groups already do, because we don't do anything different. We're eventually doing the same thing. We'll just be another load of people giving out leaflets on a demo. You might end up building yourself up to have 1,000 members, and then why would you be any different to anyone else? That's really important, I think. Like, for example, less me actually, and probably more my better half. She's the brains of the operation politically at home. She could probably get a good group of people who were in Brighton who were involved in the Corbyn stuff, young people together who'd be interested in a project like this. I think she could, she knows a lot of people who are searching around. But what would you say to them that makes what we're trying to do fundamentally different from the other groups? I suppose the way I would look at it is about that openness and that, not trying to shove a particular line down people's throats. That's important. But also we need to, if it's going to be realistic, people will want to get out and do something. They'll want to be active, not, this is important and it's always good to talk things through, but they'll want to be active. And I think we've got to be very open to listening to what people say about what we should be doing and what tactics we would take. I mean, I'd probably disagree with something Edmund just said about standing in elections. I think that's essentially a waste of time at this point. There's a huge amount of effort for no return generally, but that's a discussion, isn't it? Sorry, I'm rambling now, but you know what I'm saying? It's about those fundamentals of what, if we're sitting in this time next year, what would we have liked to have done and how do we differentiate ourselves? But also, and I'll finish on this, I don't think we can get away with, even though, they piss me off as much as anything sometimes, we can't get away with just suggesting the groups that exist at the moment don't exist. We've got to have an orientation to be, they're full of Marxists. That's important. That matters. Those people matter. Yeah, sorry.
No, thank you. Don't apologise. Those are all really good questions because we are not a talking shop. And so what you've just done is raise, well, how do we, what do we do to go beyond that? And the practical questions of why are we any different to the other groups? How are we? And also our relationship or not to those groups. And I'd very much welcome comrades' contributions on those points and others. At the moment, nobody has their hand up. Nick, are you ready to?
Yeah, I was just about to put my hand up, actually.
Okay, all right. Well, I think given that you were supposed to speak, I'll give you longer than others.
Well, don't worry about that because
Okay.
I can come back in another time. But I'm prompted. There were several points that were raised. First of all, apologies for my lateness.
Don't apologise because you're.
So and thanks very much for Will for stepping into the breach so quickly. There were several points I disagreed with in respect of both Matthew and Sandy. I agree with Will in terms of his categorization of the Ukraine war. And I think we need to think carefully about where some of the arguments might take us. For example, I do not think we should take sides in the war between Russia and Ukraine and behind Ukraine, NATO and America. I think we should call for defeat on both sides. And we should try to develop a position of independent working class struggle, however difficult to see that might be. And I think we've got to be very, very careful in our arguments not to give any suggestion or credence to the idea that we're backing Putin. And for that matter, when it comes to conflict between China and America, I don't think we should take sides in that. We've got to try to chart an independent working class line which argues against both. Because at the moment amongst the left, or sections of the left, there is an argument that's quite well developed in some places, and it's picked up on and repeated in others to a lesser degree, but that somehow, because America is the dominant, the word's been used, hegemon, I don't like the word myself, but it's the dominant capitalist power, that somehow we should give backing to any power that challenges it. And so this argument's developed that the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and all the new members of BRICS are somehow progressive, and the world would be a better, safer, more democratic, more egalitarian place if we had multipolarity rather than US imperialist domination, which of course misses out the fact that all we're seeing is a move by other capitalist powers, lesser capitalist powers, sharpening their elbows and putting on shoulder pads to try and create more space for them to take a larger chunk than they presently do of the surplus value that's created by the working class. And what's lacking, really, for the most part, on an international and a domestic basis, is a serious communist, socialist, I use those terms interchangeably, but a serious Marxist explanation of the exploitation of the working class and how things need to change. I mean, statistics come out from all sorts of places like Oxfam and other institutions which show how the wealth in the world and the receipts in terms of income that is generated are getting more and more concentrated. So the richer are getting richer and the poorer are getting poorer, and the workers are receiving less of what's produced and the owners are getting stronger. And I think it's something like 80 billionaires own more wealth than the bottom 1% of the world's population. It's quite phenomenal. And no amount of taxation, for example, the social democratic traditional Keynesian tax and spend, no amount of taxation is going to resolve that problem. And we have to start raising, in my opinion anyway, more boldly, more confidently, communist arguments for the expropriation of the capitalist class. One of the reasons it seems to me that we have the rise of the far right, not just in Europe, but around the world, is that there is an absence of any other challenge to capitalism. In the 1920s and the 1930s, when we had crisis, the extremes, if you like, the Bolshevism and the Comintern and the far right of the fascists in Italy, Germany, Romania, etc., the petty bourgeois and sections of the working class went to them, and the working class in its more militant form went to the Bolsheviks. In the present day, we don't have the Russian Revolution, we don't have the Soviet Union, however deformed or degenerate or whatever you might want to refer to it, we don't have that. And we don't have any authoritative communist movement. And so nobody's putting forward an argument against capitalism. And in that space, the far right are filling the vacuum. I've already spoken for longer, so maybe I'll try and come back, because there were some points I wanted to make about Phil's, in answer to Phil's points about what we should be trying to do and why are we different. I've got some things to say about that.
Well, I don't know. At the moment, nobody has their hand up. So if you want a couple more minutes, that's fine, Nick.
Let me just throw this out then in respect of Phil. First of all, I think that one of the things that makes us different is that we call for a united communist party. In the material that we've put out, we specifically reference socialist appeals, the Socialist Party, the SWP. You could include Socialist Alternative. There are organizations that organize thousands of people who are Marxists, and they've got to be commended for maintaining those organizations in difficult times. Now, the leadership of those organizations at the moment, it doesn't seem to me, have got any intention of forming a communist party, which, again, it seems to me, is the obvious thing that should be done. We don't have a Lenin to crack heads like happened in Britain in 1920 with the formation of the Communist Party of Britain. But any serious Marxist leader in Britain or anywhere else should be trying to bring Marxists together. And we specifically reference that, and that is something that we would put on our banner. we at the moment, as a small organisation, are primarily orienting to what we might call independent Marxists, people that don't have a home, people that have been in those organisations. And I look around the room, and pretty much everybody in this room, with a few exceptions, has been in one of those organisations, and for various reasons has no longer stayed in it, whether it's because of the lack of democracy, for the large part, I imagine, the sort of sectish, cultish attitude that sometimes developed, and so on. But the ideas is what matters. So we want a democratic, and we want a forum where debate. So, for example, like Matthew and Sandy have raised about what's the nature of Russia. Matthew said, for example, the Labour Party is a far-right party. Well, I'd like to discuss that out, because I don't think that's the terminology that I would use. I don't think you can equate it to the Swedish Democrats or Geert Wilders. My own position at the moment is still a bourgeois workers' party, although it might be on one extreme of that and moving in a particular direction. But we need a space where we can have those debates and discussions in a comradely way, without people throwing a ton of bricks on top of people for getting it wrong. We've produced a statement. If anybody hasn't read the statement, I would encourage you to read it, because I think that statement sets out a broad approach within which Marxists can organise and debate and discuss, and it's narrow enough to ensure that it's for people that want a revolutionary change, a fundamental change, the expression that I make, fundamental change in the way that society is organised. And I think my last point is this. If you ask, and this is, I think, a serious point, it seems again to me that if we look at the Marxist groups, what are called the revolutionary groups, and you ask, what is your strategy for achieving the working class coming to power? It will be some version of general strikeism, workers' councils, and somehow the tiny little group of a few thousand will somehow come to power. I think that, frankly, that is nonsense. And that's something that we need to discuss. I think we have to have a strategy of building a mass communist party. And by that, I mean a communist party in Britain of millions and of tens of millions. And if we can't win a single communist MP, then we are a long way off from changing society. And so we have to have a serious strategic discussion about how we go from the small group that we are now to being that sort of size. And that will inevitably involve discussions with the groups that Phil mentioned and others. And it will involve winning people from social democracy, from Stalinism, and that's what we've got to do. I'm extremely confident that that's possible, but it's going to be hard work, and it requires serious people, and that's what I think we're about.
Thanks very much, Nick. I hadn't seen that, in fact, Sandy has his real hand up, so I'm going to call Sandy in. But first of all, I just wanted to mention that Ed has posted the link to the statement on the chat section, and Kirsty has uploaded, and you can tell I'm not feeling well, has said Happy New Year to everybody, which I didn't say. Apologies, I'm not feeling very well. And Kirsty posted, we're too late for a party this year. When I read that, I thought she meant a New Year party, but there we go. She was being serious. We are too late for a party this year for an election in June. We wouldn't have any party ready that quickly. We all need to be singing from the same song sheet. So that is something for comrades to consider in terms of the point Ed raised about standing in the elections this year, and for further discussion on that. So, Sandy.
Right. I think we're all agreed on the point that in any war involving the UK or the USA, we are for the defeat of the USA and the UK, right? That is our position. So I would agree with that as a core principle. We are militant anti-imperialists, and you'll never build a real communist movement anywhere that isn't militantly anti-imperialist. I do, though, think that it's wrong to suggest Russia has become an imperialist country. But I would also suggest, put to you, for instance, the situation and the attack that is being suggested against Iran. Would we simply take a position, defeat on both sides? I don't think we would. I think that the mass anti-imperialist consciousness in Iran is progressive, and it comes from an understanding on the world reactionary nature of US imperialism. If you look back to 1953, when their government Mossadegh was overthrown, when they tried to nationalize the oil industry, a whole history of European and American imperialism intervening throughout the world to impose a particular form of capitalism is reactionary, and we have to be the foremost opponents in that. But obviously, in this kind of discussion, we can't get into the detail of the situation in Russia. But obviously, again, we don't support Putin, we don't support Xi in China. But again, I would argue that they're not imperialists, and we do support the struggle of the Palestinian people against the Israeli state, which is a proxy for American imperialism. So we don't always take the position support for neither side. We do support the right of national self-determination for oppressed nations, and that's important. Just to throw in one last remark, I hope I'm within the 3 minutes, about what we do now. I'm interested that the Socialists appeal are launching this Revolutionary Communist Party thing in May. Right? Is there any way to try and intervene by writing to them and the membership, say we are very much in favour of a revolutionary communist party that unites Marxists. We want it to be democratic and open. We'd like to join as a tendency to encourage debate, and we want to appeal to Marxists throughout Britain to try and build a unified revolutionary communist party. Is that a goer? You know, that's what I'd put forward as a potential thing that could be done in this year. Okay, thanks.
Thanks very much, Sandy. So Reese has posted, could there be I'm not sure if this is autocorrect or it's just me not understanding. Could there be a Discord server or a WhatsApp to talk further? I understand the WhatsApp to talk further, but I don't understand a Discord server. That sounds a good, yeah, that's something that we can consider. Do feel free to join in now anyway. Oh, thank you. Matthew has translated for me. Discord is a discussion and file sharing platform. That's how advanced I am. It sounded a bit negative to me, but obviously it makes sense to everybody else. Thank heavens for that. Okay, so just keeping eyes open for hands, feet, nothing else. Anybody want? Oh, sorry, Will. Yeah, Will.
I'll be very brief because Matthew wants to come in as well, but I'll be really, really brief, which is that I think the problem we could discuss about different qualities of imperialism, different categories of imperialism. I think it's a discussion worth having, because I see where Sandy is coming from in terms of Russia, but I don't think I agree. Actually, China is exporting capital like Billio, and is building stuff all over Latin America, all over Africa, on not brilliant terms. I mean, it's kind of promoted as a Chinese model, etc. But that's just basically, I think, imperial activity. I mean, they're not using guns, but I think that's what's going on there. And if you read some of the background to some of the projects, for instance, in the Caribbean or in Africa, it looks like imperialism to me, to be honest. And, you know, may not be, but that's what it looks like to me. And you don't necessarily have to immediately fight a war to have imperial ambitions. Some countries can have imperialist ambitions some time. Germany did, actually. And so I'm not sure I agree with you there, but it's worth discussing. Russia is different, I accept, because of what happened, the attempt to cannibalize Russia for capitalism in the post-Berlin Wall period. But I do think that the regeneration of the Russian state, its attitude towards Ukraine, the minerals and resources that exist in Ukraine, in the Luhansk and Donbass region in particular, apart from the right to self-determination, which I would defend, I don't believe in forced annexations, which is where we might end up with. And I would see that personally, I would see that as imperialist. Yeah. But again, that's something that we can discuss and debate. I don't, clearly if the United States launched an attack on Iran, it would be clear that you would be opposed to the United States doing that, in my view. And you wouldn't say that they were equal partners or an inter-imperialist conflict there. That's pretty obvious to me. But I'll leave it there, just for clarification for Sandy, really, and others.
Thanks very much, Will. Matthew.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing here is really, if you look at it in terms of the development, that the thing you can say in terms of China is, of course, it isn't actually fully capitalist. There's some contradictions in there, because you've still got, essentially a controlled economy through the state. It's not actually fully capitalist. I agree in terms of its operation as with imperialist characteristics in Africa and Latin America elsewhere. I mean, that's quite clear. And its attitude to the working class, of course, is extremely repressive. In the enterprises it's put together in those places. So, in those terms, it's a different phenomenon. In terms of what's happening, the imperialists, of course, running this massive repressive effort in order against vast sections of the population in terms of the resistance to the war, essentially, which is essentially a US-Israel war. I mean, virtually everything that's been dropped on Gaza or fired at Gaza has come from the US. The US could turn around tomorrow and say to Netanyahu, stop, and he would stop. So it's essentially a joint enterprise, in which what we're seeing is mass murder, with the at the behest of the imperialist powers, in the eyes of the world. I mean, it's with the development of the internet, it's something you can see. I mean, even where they block it, and they have blocked it from most of the media, you can see it on your computer screen and whatever else, and so it's visible to most of the world that in fact this is what is going on, that mass murder is being committed by these people. So in those terms, it's doing them enormous political damage, and what they're trying to do obviously is then to repress that in various ways. In terms of, say, like France and Germany, they've said essentially they tried to ban all the demonstrations. In Germany, you can be lifted for wearing a keffiyeh in some places. It's got to getting down to the crazy. Obviously, here it's much more difficult. In the US, of course, and common to this, of course, is the allegation anything that's against Israel is anti-Semitic. Even if you happen to be Jewish, you're clearly anti-Semitic if you're not supporting Israel. So we have this sort of mass fake anti-Semitism campaign, as a means of repression. Which is going through, and people are being in the US, they're running a McCarthyite operation in order to sack people and try to repress those who are running the campaign. And actually, of course, that in many cases, and certainly in universities and in places like New York and so on and so forth, the guts of that resistance is young Jewish people, and they're being accused of anti-Semitism. This is extraordinary. I do think, however, I will stand with my analysis.
Thanks, Matt. Can you just give a last
far
sentence?
Right. Clearly, yes. Okay, thank you.
The Labour Party's far right. Sorry, I spoke over you. Thanks a lot. Well, I think that's a discussion in itself. Richard, can you unmute yourself? You're muted. No, you're not. Thanks. Hello? Now you're muted again, Richard. You're muted. Unmute yourself. Richard, hoping you can hear me. Richard? Okay, you're unmuted, so if you can speak, that'd be great. No, now you're muted again. I'm not sure what's happening. I can't unmute you, which is a bit strange, but please unmute yourself because we can't hear you. Okay, speak now. No, it's not happening. I don't know what the problem is. Okay, does anybody else? Richard, if you just keep trying and speak, it won't be a problem if you interrupt. But at the moment, we're not getting anything from you. Okay, any other comrades wish to? Reese, did you want to come in and speak, ask a question? Comrades, no, in here you can ask a question. You can raise you don't have to speak for 3 minutes. You can just ask a question or just make a comment. There's no set way of intervening. At the moment, I haven't got anybody else's hand up. I would ask comrades to let us know what they think about. So several things have been raised. There are the discussions on countries, whether or not they are imperialist or not. There's the issue about whether the Labour Party is a far right party. Okay, Richard's just saying, I can't unmute myself. I can't start the video. I'm going to log out and log back in again. Okay, so we'll keep an eye on that. Thanks.
Phil's got his hand up, Soraya.
Phil, okay, thank you very much. Phil, yeah.
It was only very quick because nobody else was coming in. I can't remember who said it now, but this thing about socialist appeal launching a revolutionary communist party, I think the idea of having something to say about that is a good idea. I think you could use it to make the broader points about, well, if they're just going to transform themselves into another organization that's basically the same as the SP or whatever, that's pretty valueless, but it could be a very valuable exercise if it was willing to break with what's clearly a failed way of running things. I think it's a good idea.
Okay, thank you very much. I have got
Janet.
Oh, Janet. Yes, do come in, Janet.
Hi. Yeah, it's not much of a contribution, just a few questions, or maybe 1 or 2 contributions. Just going back right to the beginning, Will, you were saying, I think you said we're on the road to World War III. Did you say that?
Yes, I did.
Yeah, I mean, maybe you could explain exactly what you mean by that. I mean, then you described a whole series of different pressures and tensions. I entirely agree about those tensions rising. I don't see, though, how that kind of concludes with World War III, but maybe I'm just being optimistic. I don't know. On the imperialism issue, I mean, I think I agree with Sandy. I mean, about China, just an anecdote, really. I worked in Rwanda for a bit. It was very clear that China were pushing very hard in Rwanda around tech, new tech, and against that, the corporate, the West, and so on all the aid people, everybody was pushing for private finance. I don't understand how you then, as it will again, interpret that as being a kind of default imperialism. I mean, it seems to me it was about capitalism. I don't quite know why that seems, but then I don't know about some of the other places you were talking about, a little bit more about Africa. I think the other, and then just going back, I think it's quite difficult when we're talking about a kind of wide, very wide context, and then we're talking about the very specifics around this group. And I understand how those are related, clearly, but it's a bit of a well, I don't just on that little, the practical point. I don't see how public meetings run by this small group could work. I mean, public meetings are extremely difficult to organize. I could understand how people in this group can take part in and use opportunities that will arise very much over the next few months to try and run a platform or whatever. But I really don't see how putting any energy into trying to have your own meetings or our own meetings is going to work, actually. I think that was all. There was something about Palestine, but maybe I'll come back later.
Thanks very much. Richard, you're back with us.
I am. It's amazing. I thought that I use Zoom a lot, and I've never had this problem before. But so I just rebooted my phone because I thought there might be an issue with my phone or whatever. But I'm alive and with you. Thank you. I'll just be very brief. I think the statement that has been produced is an excellent starting point for the future, and we ought to use it clearly as a guiding light and refer to it regularly. Otherwise, we're just going to ramble into side issues. I would have thought that any organization that is made up of people like ourselves who have all come from Leninist type party traditions will probably feel, as I feel, that a short program, one side of A4, not too many points, not hundreds of points, good-sized font, stating our goals, something we can unite around, is something that we could do with producing. And it shouldn't be too complicated, but it obviously needs to be clearly Marxist, clearly anti-capitalist, clearly stating our aim for socialism, a democratic, open, egalitarian society, and our commitment to run this very organization like that, knowing that we are not going to be able to become in the future what we are not now ourselves. It does worry me that there's a risk that we could end up trying to become the freshest, the latest form of revised Trotskyist movement, and that in which we have to have agreed positions on Russia, on the nature of imperialism, of Iran, over what happened in Chile, and all the rest of it. Because if we do that and start our meetings regularly, get stuck on these issues, I can't see that we're going to go anywhere, because this is not going to have an appeal to anybody except people who have been who spent years embedded in the kind of literature and discussions that many of us have. So I think the idea of having a united position on all issues in politics, even all major issues in politics in the world, is misconceived, and we shouldn't do that. And even some examples that have been given of things that we might all agree on, for example, the right of national self-determination. Well, I flag up now, there's a whole communist tradition, the left communist tradition, that would say no to that would say that for the working class, their community is the world working class. It's not a national flag. The national flags have pretty much in general been created by imperialism at the beginning of the 20th century. That we don't have loyalty to Russia, China, or Palestine. And left communists are genuine Marxists. There are decent numbers of solo left communists about the place. Are we going to have a program that says immediately to them, no, you're not with us. You might be genuine Marxists, but we're committed to national self-determination, to the cause of the Palestinians. Obviously, we're all committed to defending the Palestinians from the brutal attacks of the Israeli state and the American state. But that is rather different from saying we're in favor of a free Palestine from the river to the sea. So there's a whole major tradition in our movement that would say
Richard,
say
could you
no
just
to
wind-
nation states.
Sorry
Okay,
to
I'll
interrupt.
stop there.
Okay, I didn't want to stop you mid-sentence. That's great, thank you. So anybody who hasn't spoken who wants to speak before I call Ed in? No. Okay, Ed.
Yeah, thanks, Soraya. I thought it would be interesting to just sort of move the discussion on to the year ahead and what this group can be doing. As I sort of touched on in my contribution before, I'm enthusiastic about the prospect of developing in-person meetings. Obviously, the scale and the format of those is something to be decided, and we'll, bluntly, we'll go with what works rather than setting unrealistic ambitions at this stage. But I think while the 6 months or so that we've done these Zoom meetings has been positive, and we've developed a good group of regular attendees, and we have had lots of interesting discussions. I think there are things that come out in an in-person meeting, especially one which draws together people who all live or have ties to a particular area. It provides a much more sort of fruitful atmosphere, and there are things that emerge in an in-person meeting and the sort of one-on-one or one-on-one conversations afterwards that will make that a more productive format in the year ahead. So I'm very keen to hear what people think about that. I think in relation to the general election and how we discuss things and what sort of politics we're advocating for, I think I agree with Richard. The statement that's been drafted is a very good start, and that gives us a very sort of rock solid base from which to develop our politics. And I think one of the key things that the communist movement as a whole, not just talking about this group, but our movement as a whole, fragmented and isolated as it is really to break out of its isolation, to try and reassert itself as relevant, and to be bold in asserting that communism is the answer to the problems facing society as a whole, and the problems people face in their everyday lives. And so that's really what I'm interested in. Obviously, drawing people into a discussion about communism and communist politics as a whole, which can encompass as many potential different facets and topics as you can think of, obviously, but also thinking about new and fresh and intelligible ways to present our politics as something relevant and something that we can fight for and something that we can win. So that's what I'm interested in, and seeing this group develop, and I'd be keen to hear everyone else's thoughts as well.
Thanks, Ed. Anybody else want to Will, I can see your hand, but I was thinking I'd call you in to sum up. Actually, I'll call Nick in for a bit first, and then you. But I just wanted to know if there's anybody else who wants to say anything. All right. Well, just a couple of things from me, and I'll set the things starting now. I think comrades have raised really interesting points. I actually think that we do need to try and get out into areas and have face-to-face meetings if we can. We use both methods, as it were, but I do think it's important to have, as Ed's just said, a local presence, because it then leads on to the practical work that you can do in an area, whether it's on a particular campaign or whatever. I think that's really important, and I don't mean that by trying to substitute yourself or trying to suggest that you can get rid of capitalism by single issue campaigns, but at the same time, there are also individual battles to fight, and it's getting the contact with people. And I think maybe we haven't got the time here, but I do know that the issue of discussing, okay, I can see Janet saying I was talking about public meetings, not quite what Ed is describing, which could be open but have a different purpose maybe. Yes, I mean, I think it's just how we get to talk to people, because we have a website, we have the Facebook page, but most young people, I don't think, go on those things, and so it's how we get to them, and whether that means having a public meeting, handing out leaflets on the street and talking to people. I'm open to all sorts of things. Standing in the elections, whether there is a point or not, that's another discussion we can have. Various comrades have raised the issue of approaching the Socialist Party and its initiative. Socialist Appeal and its initiative, this new Communist Party. In 2 words, it's not enough. We should have a discussion about that. I am not being sectarian, but I do know them, so I think really they are just rebranding themselves, and that their aim is to build their party bigger, rather than building a mass party. Their methodology, one of our issues is about democracy in the groups, and that is a big obstacle to some work. I don't want to say not being prepared to work with other groups, because of course that would be a nonsense, but just the practical issues there are. Okay, I'm going to stop myself now, and I'm going to call, let me just check. I haven't missed anybody. Oh, Sandy, I'll give you, Sandy, yeah, go on.
Yeah. What about an open letter on communist unity addressed to the whole process? You know, the Socialist Appeal have said that they're going to be forming this organisation in May, you know, saying that we welcome such a thing. We should be drawing in all communists, all socialists into such an organisation, and, you know, putting an open letter, and we could have meetings around that. That would be a useful theme. And I mean, they do claim to be have internal democracy. And I know communists have had experience and will say it's a facade. It's not really. It's 1 or 2 people. But I do think that to take them on the face is a good idea, you know, of what they're saying, and just say, yes, that's what we want as well. A communist organisation that fights for the working class and has democratic debate and deciding on the way forward. And that's what we need. And we welcome that if you're serious about building such a thing. And, you know, that's, I think, would be a useful initiative, and you could have local meetings based around that, if such a letter could be drafted, and we could discuss it and then put it out and see if we can have an effect. That's it.
Thanks for that. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to call Nick in, and then Will, to round the meeting off. Nobody else has got their hand up, so looking at the time, seems a sensible thing to do. Nick, just looking, yeah, if you can have about 41, 51, 61, 9 minutes, Nick.
Okay, very precise.
Well, it is. I'm just looking at, then that would live
Okay.
10. Yeah, great.
All right. So, the first thing I want to say is that, in one sense, well, it's an obvious thing. The idea that this group of people could turn into or help to create what I was talking about, a communist party of millions, seems perhaps far-fetched, certainly daunting. And I recognize that. But the point is, it has to be done. We can't do it on our own, so we have to find other people. And there are models out there which we've been in or we've observed, and we have to work out why they haven't particularly worked and what we can do differently and better. one of the things that I think we need to understand is that in any serious movement, particularly if it's going to draw together people who've got a lot of experience, as well as people that have got little experience, there are going to be all sorts of differences. And even in this small meeting, we've already seen that there are lots of differences. So the point that Richard made, and Ed, and the point that I was making about our statement, is that we find out, or we work out around the statement, or perhaps a version of it, what brings us together. And we have differences, and we have debates, and we have discussion within that, as we've been having today. And it's attractive, in my opinion. Other people say, yes, I agree with communism, or I agree with what they're trying to do. And what's more, this organization gives the space for you to think and to say and to speak and to change your mind. And that's what I'm interested in. Now, I think the points that have been raised by Sandy about a letter, or Matthew about a letter to Socialist Appeal, I think that's a very interesting suggestion, and we should definitely consider that. I tend to think that it's more a rebranding of Socialist Appeal than a genuine attempt to build an open, democratic, communist party that would allow factions and debate and dissent. And it would perhaps, I anticipate, perhaps insist on an acceptance of a lot of Trotskyist positions, some of which I would agree with and some of which I wouldn't. I don't agree that the Soviet Union was a worker state. Would I be able to be in Socialist Appeal? I don't know. But for me, that's not important. What is important for me is not a debate about the nature of the Soviet Union necessarily, or was it state capitalism, or was it a deformed worker state? It's the question of what sort of society are we programmatically calling for now? And that's the debate that we need to be having. And within that, we can look back and we can have all sorts of interesting discussions about this, that, or the other historically within Marxism. In terms of economic crisis theory, there are various different positions. For example, is it underconsumptionist? Is it disproportionality? Is it the tendency for the rate of profit to fall? I'm very much of the latter point of view. But should that mean that people fall out and can't be in the same organization because they have a difference over that? If we agree with a program that ultimately involves a call for the expropriation of the capitalist class and the introduction of a new form of society, that's what we really need. So we need articles, arguments for communism, socialism, setting out why capitalism doesn't work, why capitalism is constrained, it can't develop the productive forces in any way that would be comparable if we overcame the private ownership of the means of production and the nation state. And I just want to comment in passing, all of these things I think we need to come back and have discussions on, because there's so many things that need to be fleshed out, given more space to breathe, to people to express themselves and so on. There is a danger for us who come out of certain traditions that we simply repeat things that we've learned that might have been relevant at one stage. And we've got to ask ourselves several questions. For example, if we're looking back at Lenin, or at Marx for that matter, or at Trotsky, the first question that we would ask perhaps is, well, were they right at the time that they said it? And then, well, have things changed? And is that still right now? And I had this argument once with somebody in the SWP who was arguing about why you had to have a sort of monolithic outlook. And I said, well, look, Rosa Luxemburg had a completely different picture from Lenin on the right of nations to self-determination. Are you suggesting that Rosa Luxemburg wouldn't be allowed in the SWP? And their answer was no, that they wouldn't. To me, that's just abominable. What you need is people like Rosa Luxemburg in, whether she was right or wrong, because she was a fantastic revolutionary socialist and committed her life to the changing of society and in the interest of the working class. I'll just say this. My own position is that the national question, particularly in the context of the Middle East, and I mean, people can come back at me and throw a ton of bricks at me, but from my point of view, the national question in the Middle East can only be resolved by the achievement of socialism. It can only be achieved by a Middle Eastern regional revolution that would overthrow all of the regimes, not just Israel, but all of the regimes, and the working class coming to power. And that would enable the different peoples of that region to establish, if they so wanted, a particular nation as we transition to a new communist society. But the nation state, in my opinion, is an obstacle. It creates rivalry, it creates conflict, it creates wars, and the role of communists and the aim of communism is to overthrow that. And so we want to get rid of the nation state. Every single contribution in this meeting could be turned into an article for our website. Not a long one, but a short one. It could be 400 words, it could be 800 words. Somebody might want to write longer, but every single person that's spoken could be turned into an article, and an interesting article, and it could lead to debate. It could lead to other people contributing. In terms of going out, the statement, I think, is crucial. And we really need to take that statement out. We need to disseminate it. We need to proselytize around it. And we need to come to your area where you live, and we need to have face-to-face talks with you and your friends and your comrades. And we need to go from having one person there or two people there to seeing whether we can't get half a dozen there. And in some places where we've got more, maybe we could have a public meeting. Is that my time, Soraya?
20 seconds.
Okay. I'm very enthusiastic, confident, and I think we could really achieve stuff. We need your suggestions, your ideas. We've been thinking about what we can do in terms of podcasts, of radio, different types of media, and so on. The sky's the limit. We just need your help. We need more skill. We need some money, but I think we can do it.
Thank you very much. Great. All right. And Will, can you do sum up in 9 minutes? So I've just got a minute to close the meeting.
Much less than that. We don't have to finish at 9, much less. I mean, partially because Nick's basically said 90% of what I was going to say, which is fine, actually. But I just want to kind of just emphasize some points from my, that have come up. One is Janet was talking about where's this World War III coming from? I don't think that the Ukraine war in and of itself, or the combination of the Middle East, Ukraine, and Taiwan, is in the next immediate period going to lead to World War III. But I think they are indicative of an inter-imperialist struggle. And I think the Ukraine war is part of an inter-imperialist struggle, however you describe Russia, because it is absolutely not in the interests of China that Russia should lose. And so I think China is a capital. I think this is why it's worth having these kind of open discussions and disagreements, because it struck me the other day that clearly what is happening with China is a form of state-centered accumulation. Yeah, much like South Korea did, much like Japan did, on a capitalist basis, but with a one-party state that happens to be called a Communist Party, but it has billionaires on its board. Yeah, I just think that is part of a struggle that will emerge between China and the United States and each of their allies for global dominance. And I actually do like the word hegemony. I think it's a good word. That the Americans are hegemonic. I don't know anymore. I think we're entering into a period pretty much like pre-First World War, where there are going to be a series of struggles that some of them might not look connected, but they're part of a generalized struggle. The question for me is not whether there will be a third world war, but what it will look like and how it will be fought. Because it might not be nuclear. Second thing that I want to talk about is Richard Harris's contribution, which I found really interesting. I think we're trying to establish a culture and a practice of democratic Marxism and build connections with layers of people who agree with that approach. And I like the way that Ed put it, that we progress where we can progress. I don't think anybody's got ideas of big meetings or anything like that, but actually linking up with lots of independent Marxists, bringing people together who basically look at what happened to the far left in the kind of post-68 period. Look at what happened to the WRP or the IMG or the SWP or the Militant, which basically all exploded because they couldn't contain contradictions within them. And I think that was mainly because they weren't fully democratic organizations. Some of them were very undemocratic organizations. And I think one of the contributions we can make and what we should look to is not a replication of the Trotskyist past or even, other pasts, but a creation of a democratic Marxist network, organization, current, whatever you want to call it. But not that we are the cell that will then lead to the big Communist Party, but we're the people that are trying to bring together the layers that make that conversation possible about how a mass communist socialist party might be formed. We are kind of an agitator. We're a chemical, we're part of the necessary chemistry for that to happen. And we can draw people together to do that. And in some places, it might be a meeting with one other person. I've done that before. It might be might be a meeting with half a dozen. It might be a meeting with more. It's a question of how do we build this project, not that we're at the center of, but that we want to be part of, that we play a role in bringing together. I also think that, in essence, we try very hard not to quote Lenin, Trotsky, whoever, Zaitkin, Kollontai, or, we don't want to build an organization where there is you have to agree with everything, every dot and comma, or, it's just an organization that says we need to overthrow capitalism, discuss how that happens. We need to replace it with a society based on socialist values and communist values. And that, for me, it's a materialist analysis, is the basis of it. And in its analysis that, in the present state that we find ourselves in, needs to be focused on, for me, two things. One is a working class campaign globally to stop the march to war and inter-imperialist conflict that's leading to a world war. And also my own personal interest is that, the issue around the climate disaster we're facing, which is getting worse by the month, unfortunately. And that we need to act in concert with others to build a party that can make effective steps on both those fronts and convince people that an alternative society is possible, that our response to Thatcherism and to Blairism, the Tina and Starmerism, is that there is an alternative to this mess, and it's called socialism or communism, and it is deliverable if we band together to deliver on it.
Thank you very much. Thanks very much, Will, and thanks again for stepping in at extremely short notice to speak tonight. Well, thanks everybody. Thanks for attending. Thanks for the contributions. Thanks for the questions. And just the next discussion on the 22nd of January is something that was raised by comrades tonight. What should socialists, communists do in the 2024 general election in the UK? So what should we say? How do we prepare? Chris Strafford is going to introduce that discussion. So it flows very much from the discussion we've had tonight. The next one on the 5th of February, again, all part of the discussion about broad left and so on, is how has the broad left project Die Linke fared in Germany? From Syriza in Greece to Podemos in Spain, as comrades said tonight, broad left parties have been a failed model internationally for those on the left. What lessons can we learn from that, and what should we be proposing? And Ed Potts will introduce that discussion. And then on the 19th of February, 2 years on the war in Ukraine, it was 22nd of February in 2022 that Russia invaded Ukraine, and will introduce the discussion on that. What do Marxists say? The internationally, the left, the broad left, has been divided on Ukraine, and so discuss what comrades think and what Marxists should be. We think Marxists should be saying about it. So I'd ask everybody to register for those meetings if you haven't already, and tell people about them and encourage them to come along. And just say thank you very much again, comrades, for coming. I say coming tonight, but participating tonight. I would say Happy New Year at the end of the meeting to everybody, and I hope that everybody who hasn't been feeling particularly brilliant feels better the next time round. Thank you very much. Thanks everybody for participating. See you at the next meeting.